Talking about the future. It's now. It's happening. Technology is moving and grooving, not only under hood, but between cars, forms of transportation, and all things mobility. We're honored to bring in Jens Martin Skibsted from Denmark. Jens, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to first say, viel danke, all right, if I can, for really calling in. It's a late hour. Of course, we do the show live, and we so appreciate that, so we wanted to honor the fact that you spent time with us. Thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Excellent. So you have been a council member of the World Economic Forum's Future of Cities and Urbanization team. That's a big deal. You've been featured throughout multiple media outlets like Huffington Post. I want to, before we dive into tech, I want to get a sense of your career when you first started. We have a lot of youngsters that listen to the show. How did you evolve into this whole space, and perhaps throughout maybe an early mentor that really motivated you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Denmark, and the city I grew up in, you have 40% of all people commuting to work by bike. So it was an obvious choice for me to start out by making bikes, and that's what I did. And the idea to differentiate them was to make them super attractive, right? So if you look at bikes in cities, they are, they're faster, they're cheaper, they're healthier, better for the environment. Yet people tend to drive in cars. Cars make a lot of sense on longer distances, but in city centers, not a lot, right? So, but why is it then that everybody drives a car in the middle of the city? It's basically because you can express who you are, right? You can tell the story about yourself, and bikes couldn't really do that. So that was my ambition, basically to make a bike where people would want to step out of the car and get onto it.
I got to ask you and interject as we kind of travel your journey. Absolutely, Europe, Frankfurt. You can go through major cities. Unlike the U.S., the U.S. doesn't. I mean, we have a small culture, but nothing like Europe when it comes to bikes. Can you talk to me? You had mentioned a cleaner bike for the environment. Many have listened to that. What does that mean? A cleaner bike for the environment? Is this in the materials? Talk to us about that.
Well, it's cleaner in the sense that you don't have the combustion emissions, right?
I got you. That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah.
And of course, it's also cleaner in the sense that you have less CO2 emissions. So you could say an electric car is clean in terms of combustion. You don't have any fumes going out, but you still use a lot of energy, and that energy comes from somewhere, and that creates some global warming. So in that sense, bikes are they're more effective even than walking, right? So it's actually better for the planet if you biked than walked, because you spend more energy and eat more beef while you walk around.
Yeah, no, I mean, this makes perfect sense. I'm just challenged in my mindset. As here we are in the United States, we like our things, large meals, large cars, and we're kind of grumpy about making a transition. Why do you think our culture has sort of not embraced the same sort of attitude towards a bike? I mean, we're healthy, as you said, our carbon footprint is minimized. We complain about our environment, but it doesn't seem like we've really jumped on board like Denmark, Scandinavian countries, Norway for sure. What's your theory there?
Well, so part of it is that, it's a practical one. Some very spread out cities like LA or Detroit, it's just the distances are just too big to be biking around. But in the more dense cities, I think it's a lot about culture. So the U.S. is a very car-centric culture. And, even dying in a car like James Dean did becomes an iconic thing.
I know. What a history we have, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But it's been an inspiration for the entire world, and the rest of the world became car-centric as well. But so that culture has not really happened for bikes. So if you look cool in a car and not on a bike, you're going to choose the car, right? So end of the day, getting, having beautiful partners is more attractive to you than, being practical.
Yeah. Before we get to the flying car projects that you were involved in, designing a bike, some would say, well, the bike has been around, since who knows when, hundreds of years maybe, right? That must have been a big task for you. You saw an opportunity and you're well known in that arena. What were the challenges in just taking two wheels, some metal, aluminum, what have you, and really putting your signature on it for design?
Well, again, you have tons of new tech coming up constantly, and I think the automotive industry has done a good job in finding out what's out there. How can we reappropriate? How can we make better cars out of these new technology, new techs? But that's not really true for the bikes. Right? They're basically some rods you weld together in a triangle. They've been so for over 100 years.
Right.
And so it wasn't that challenging to find some technologies that could really change that completely.
Understood.
So I used some type of vacuum molding it's called superplastic forming of aluminum, and it's a thing that you've used it a bit in cars. You've used it on some Aston Martins. You basically or mostly have used it for jet planes because it's good for low quantities, and so that I could completely mold a bike out of aluminum with that technology that would look completely different from what you knew, and also bring down weight, etc.
That's awesome. It is, as you said, something that I think when you have the passion, the motivation, you definitely, obviously, you've had the engineering rudiments, the design. That's something to take advantage of. Going back some time, I believe several years ago, you were involved with one of the first flying cars. Am I right by saying that?
Yes, very true. At least in terms of getting certified, it's I think the first. It's the Terrafugia Transition. It was started by some guys up at MIT, and these projects have a ton of people and involved in it of all sorts of with all sorts of specialties. I took part in a tiny bit of it. My design company Kibisi helped do some of the soft design. At some point, one of the investors looked at how it looked and said, "This is not going to work." He said, "Call Jens Martin," and that's what happened. And I started working with them.
Understood. Give us some insight, because this was cutting edge back then. We do know that China currently, I believe they have the e-hang. There's always some news. It seems like Dubai, they're throwing up signs of, that there could be a future included. Some would say a flying car right now in sort of a drone style engineering is way too loud. We're not going to have these drones flying over neighborhoods. How high can we go with altitude? What were the challenges for the Terrafugia during the time you guys came together? Was drone technology even a thought back then in those days?
No, what they call urban air mobility, where you whiz around in these Jetsons, like things like in eVTOLs or VTOLs, or drones with humans in, that was not really a thing. Most of the tech was around by then, that you could make small electric distributed motors, the GPS system, the processing power. The stuff was coming around, but it wasn't really come together yet. So it was a different environment. I understand why there's a lot of resistance. So again, going from city to city is very different from being within a city. So you're probably not going to be bothered if people fly from somewhere in Ohio to somewhere in Utah, because you're not going to hear a lot of noise.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But if you're in a city center, having such a fan blow down on you, is highly annoying. And
yeah, sure. Well, let me ask you this: what excites you right now, Jens? I mean, drone technology is incredible right now, and we hear stories. In fact, we reported on the show not too long ago. I believe it was McDonald's or one of the big, worldwide franchises that are now going to start delivering. I think through Uber Eats, they're going to deliver meals. Is this just sizzle? I mean, where do you see drone technology, and what excites you right now, not only in design, but perhaps the practicality? Practicality meaning it will work for both the consumer, institution, organization, and the big R, regulation. What gets you excited right now? What companies do you see out there that, they have a good chance?
Well, what drones do extremely well is to go places where roads don't go. So, if you have to go very, places that are not dense for very long distances, where it's hard to get, they do very well. So there's some ventures on the African continent, getting medicine out, in the middle of nowhere with drones. That's perfect, because it's just too expensive to build a huge road through such a big territory.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. I think, as you said earlier, and of course, the average individual is not going to we're not going to get our barbecue chicken delivered overhead over our house and our neighbor. We can hear all that mess, but it makes novel sense for the remote areas to have this form of transportation, because infrastructure, let's take Afghanistan, for example, to build out roadway infrastructure out there, multi-billions of dollars. So perhaps Afghanistan could look at, or areas of Africa could look at, ways of droning things in, ways of transportation through drone technology. That may be a bit more practical. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and so that's one application where you've got to fly those long distances where there's no infrastructure. It also makes sense in situations where you don't want a human flying around. So it's, on the more negative side, if you like, you see now in the Ukraine-Russia war, both sides are, they're winning the war, or they're trying to win the war with drones, right? Because it's better that they get shut down than humans get shut down. So there are applications out there that are super interesting. Within cities, they're also too dangerous, right? It's fairly easy to hack such a thing. And I mean, after 9/11, we're not that keen on having flying objects coming too close to our buildings. So I see that as a bit of a challenge. I mean, the idea with the Terrafugia back then was, it was an airport-to-airport thing, but then you can fold up the wings and drive out. So it makes sense to people that can't fly home. If you fly with visual flight regulation, it means you can only fly if you can see stuff very far ahead. And so then you don't get caught and you can drive back. But I think the most interesting thing is in the U.S. there are over 5,200 public use airports, and they're not really that much used, right? So how can we integrate that in the rest of the infrastructure? So there's some interesting stuff going around. How do we merge infrastructure that these things could help with?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Utilize the cutting edge design, technology, and repurpose what we have. If you're just joining us, we have Jens Martin Skibsted. He's Global Partner VP Foresight Mobility, as well as please visit Amazon.com. His latest book, Expand, Stretching the Future by Design. Jens, hang with us. We got a quick break. We're going to bring you back in. We're going to dive into more topics regarding mobility and technology. Stay tuned. Wrench Nation. Support for Wrench Nation Car Talk, the smart choice for auto parts. Pronto National Association. Pronto is committed to the independent automotive aftermarket and demonstrates leadership within the automotive industry. Pronto Association is made up of nearly 100 member auto part distributors. Visit pronto-net.com. Automotive technical training, parts lineup, and representation of the automotive member community. Pronto-net.com. Wrench Nation, Frank Lloyd's hanging out with you. I remind you to get to wrenchnation.tv. Life gets busy. Listen to a show or two at your leisure. Grab a beverage, relax. Big shout out to a lot of my industry peers that listen to the show. I've heard you. You've come up with some great topics. Remember, this is our show. It's an open mic for you. And I do remind you, AVI On Demand, all my technicians and shop owners, get ready. You got plenty of time. The 2023 AVI Conference is happening right in beautiful Sanibel Harbor Resort, the Marriott there, January 12th to the 15th. January is coming, 2023. I want to remind you, AVI is an accredited ASC training provider. You know them well, offering very progressive courses in the arena of hybrid and EV technology. That is what we're talking about. We need to know this stuff. Some of you are retiring right now. No, you're not. You got to know, because it could be in your service bays. And in all reality, we're talking about diesel technology as well as engine performance. Register today. Book your event ticket. You can visit aviondemand.com. I will be in-house. I'll be teaching a course on marketing and small business strategies and tactics for the service bays. aviondemand.com. We are talking about mobility, the future. Some of us are confused. I'll be honest with you. I get confused. I try to follow a few good, non-fake news outlets. It's hard, especially as someone working in the service bays. Perhaps my kids may have to work on these things in the future. And so we are honored to have Jens Martin Skibsted. He's a global partner, vice president of Foresight Mobility, calling in live. Thank you so much from Denmark. Jens, are you there?
Yes. Thank you.
I got to say, you're doing a lot in this arena. You've written a book. Before we dive in to what some would say is we're going way, way too fast by the way of this sort of anti-ice movement. Some of us would say that, and some would say get with the program. We need to save the environment and so on. Before we dive into that, I want to get into this book. You wrote a book recently. Of course, it's available on Amazon. Expand, Stretching the Future by Design. This was a natural transition for you. You're in the design movement and business. Tell us about the book.
Thanks. Yes, the book was basically about innovation getting stuck, right? So even the fact that we are talking about what are we actually going to do with these drones? Are they real? When will they actually serve any good? Is really there to show that innovation is just freewheeling without really looking at what is it that we actually need, right? What's desirable? It can't be that way around, that stuff happens and then we just have to adopt it, right? Machines don't happen to us. Machines are made by us, right? So getting that focus back in innovation, that's very much what this book is about.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. It's the first time you summarize what you see, all things drone, and it seems to be a negative bias. It's military, it's destructive, we're taking people out, it doesn't seem to, for the average consumer, I think I can speak for the average consumer, seem to have any positive movement. I mean, we tried to get excited and we said, hey, you're going to get a cheeseburger possibly delivered by a drone. We don't know if that's shtick, but I think your book, diving into that topic, is well needed so that we can really see the positive light of the future of transportation, and not by the way of some over-the-top millionaire or billionaire that decided, yeah, I'm going to make a flying drone. It's going to be for me, and I'm going to fly it from house to house. How does this affect the common individual and their future transportation? And I think that's important. I also want to give credit. You wrote this book with Christian Basin. So big shout out to Christian Basin as well. Again, you can find the book on Amazon.com. Expand, Stretching the Future by Design. I'll make sure to have that in the show notes. Now, as an automotive technician, we kind of evolved. We were the old mechanics. Then we became technicians. Now we're reading lines of code and we're deciphering data. And that new F-150 has 100 million lines of code. We have learned so much in the last 10 years for sure that's got us on pins and needles. And we grasp all this new technology so that we can repair and service these vehicles. And voila, here comes over-the-air updates. And as I said, dealing with CAN bus systems. Do you think we are going too fast, or do you think this EV movement is overdue, and get over yourself, you'll be fine?
Yeah, I think it's overdue, right? There's nothing that solves all problems in the world, but this does solve a lot of the problems that relate to driving around in cars. That said, of course, if you're a mechanic, there are some challenges, right? As you said, you've got to do stuff you haven't done before. And some way you're a little bit out of control because a lot of it is black box. So in the same way that if you wanted to, you probably could, fix your or get your iPhone fixed. The moment you do that, the warranty goes away. So there's a lot of challenges around that, and one that's also very important is that there are not a lot of movable parts. So when you have a lot of movable parts, stuff break, and you got to repair it. If you don't have that, it breaks less, right? So there's less of a need for the mechanic, and the mechanic has completely new challenges. That said, when things change, there are always some opportunities, right? So I don't think it's doom and gloom. It's just a new world, and you've got to not just adapt, you've got to reinvent.
Yeah, and I agree. There's a whole movement in the industry, in the aftermarket. I can speak for the aftermarket. Specifically, we need to touch upon, you mentioned it ever so briefly, and that is the ability, if we're going to train up on how to test properly, decipher data, look at modules and how they communicate, which we are, well, golly, we need the information. And I remind you guys listening, right to repair is a serious movement, and so far, so good. It looks like, in fact, Tesla is starting to play ball and release their Tesla toolbox, which allows us to set their version of steering angle sensors for alignment and so on. But we need to continue a movement so we have the ability to have unfettered access to this data so that we can fix and service these vehicles. And on that point, I've got to ask you, because Europe seems to be a whole lot progressive, regulatory is a little different. Is the average automotive technician, if I can ask this, Jens, throughout Europe, and perhaps you can speak for Denmark, are they playing ball fine with data in terms of how the OEs like Volkswagen and all out there are releasing the data? Is this a problem or no?
It's not like a political problem. People don't shout out about it, but it does mean that when you go to the car shop, you need to speak to the few that actually have trained specifically for this, right? So it does change the landscape. And what regards, the right to repair, that's actually a thing that goes across any machine, right? So most things, if they break today, it's cheaper to buy a new one, and that's not really ideal. We got to get away from this just throwing things away. Of course, a car is too expensive to throw away, but a washing machine or a TV or a phone or whatever, they're actually cheaper to throw away than to actually fix.
Yeah, it makes some sense. I know I speak for a lot of farmers as well. I know that in Holland there's a big viable uproar. Farmers are losing their ability to farm and so on. But on the technological side of things, I can speak for Middle America here. One will invest in a very expensive piece of equipment to farm, and that equipment goes down. Don't you dare tell a farmer he cannot fix his equipment. And currently, he's locked out of data retrieval and being able to. So this does speak to right to repair that is across the board. Very well said to those items that you're just not going to throw away and upgrade to the latest model. It just isn't practical. I've got to ask you, Tesla, moving and grooving, $14,000, $15,000. I can say, hey, yes, Mr. Elon, update me for full self-driving. I will pay for it. It is beta right now. It's not in full organized step, but they're beta testing. We were honored to have New York City Traffic Commissioner and author of the book, No One Behind the Wheel. Gridlock Sam Schwartz is the author, and he declares by mid-century, 2050, you could be arrested for actually driving a vehicle in certain municipalities. Are you on the same page with that? I mean, could that be?
Well, if he thinks that cars by then will be fully automated and you don't really intervene, then I don't believe it at all, right? I mean, the devil is in the detail, and some of these judgments that we make are extremely complex, right? If we see a youngster run on the sideway, a car like that is not going to think about it. We will immediately think, is this youngster, going to run out in the middle of the traffic because he has no clue? There are tons of very complex situations that they can't handle. And but that said, there might be. I think it's a realistic scenario that being 100% controlled by people might not be true either at that point. I mean, in Europe, all new cars now are made so they can be speed controls. So at some point, you're going to basically not be able to drive faster than the speed allowed. Right? So that type of not being able to be free, I believe, is true for 2030.
Yeah, and I think it does speak to some of the innovation regarding the camera systems. There's a big argument, sort of battle between how effective artificial intelligence, predictive analysis, the billions of lines of code, I guess I can say, millions of recorded data for that AI and predictive analysis that goes into, will that kid, based upon his arm moving a certain way, is he going right or left? That's a tough one. That's a very tough example, but it is pretty neat to see Tesla really proving that these camera systems and with the right data interpretation based upon scenarios prior seem to be the future movement, while others say, no, you kind of need to have that LiDAR. It'll be interesting to see how all that plays out in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, but there is some human interaction. I mean, if I sat in front of you, you would be able to see on my eyes my intent, right? I mean, how is a machine going to do that while I'm moving in the middle of the traffic and there are 100 other people moving around? I mean, that level of complexity is not just around the corner.
I believe that 100%. It's nice to see many talented engineers under the Tesla brand. In fact, all the brands that are really trying to prove this very difficult technology. Speaking of which, let's go back to the consumer. Especially here in the States, like we have a driving culture. Like a lot of us are like, no, you're not taking over my car. However, maybe, as you said earlier, yes, we've had cruise control for many years. We've got cruise control now that's quite automated with braking and distance between cars and so on. But there seems to still be this behavioral resistance and sort of this psychological barrier that we don't want to lose control of a vehicle. How do you see that parlaying in the future? Are we just a generation or two right now that our future grandkids and great-grandkids will laugh at us and say, oh, they drove, what was their problem? I mean, this is a big psychological step in behavioral change. What do you see in the arena of technology that may be able to help with that, human behavior?
Well, I think it's very much a behavioral thing, right? So, and a cultural thing as well, right? To you and I growing up, the car was, there was a sense of freedom. The first thing you had to do was to get a driver's license and just go wherever you wanted to go. That, I think, sense of freedom you no longer really necessarily have, right? For one of the reasons is that you're stuck in traffic, right? So how do you feel free then? But also, as you say, there's a lot of tech creeping up on us, and we're using the cruise control, etc. So I think slowly we will trust these things. I've personally used these types of automation, and there's still none that I trust, right? Every time at some point the car does something weird, I'm like, okay, this I'm not going to trust. But how things change, that can they can change in mysterious ways. So Paris, I grew up in Paris. It was an extremely car-centric city, and people almost got mad if they saw me on a bike because why would you disturb us with this object, right? So. But today, Paris is very much, it's very welcoming to bikes. A lot of people bike around, and they started by having this sharing system of bikes. Nobody used them. So why get up on this bike? But then at some point, people realized that when the route taxi drivers said, I don't really know if I'm going to take you in the middle of the night, when they came home from clubbing, they couldn't drive their own car, they were drunk, and so and then they had to deal with these rude cab drivers. So they're like, okay, I'm just going to jump on the bike, right? So and then they found out, oh, this bike is actually fairly practical, and then they thought, why not use it during the day as well? And so that uptake came in a complete random way. So sometimes, you don't know how things happen, right? But
you do, but you I tell you, Jens, you just painted a picture. Some clubbing individual who's a little tipsy. I don't think I've witnessed a drunken cyclist. I mean, that would be a pretty interesting view. But no, you make a lot of sense. It's very practical. I have about a minute left. I've got to ask you this. We have a lot of automotive technicians and shop owners that listen to the show. What do you believe will a modern-day mechanic need as a critical skill set to work on these cars of the future?
Well, I think there are some essentials electroengineering that unfortunately you got to go back to the drawing board and learn about, right? And then I would think you got to get your hands on as many used EVs as possible and just start tearing them apart, right? Because right now the brands seem to own and control that whole process, and the right to repair is really hampered. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, go out, the practicality of it. There's a big shout out to Rich Rebuilds. He's got over 1 million subs on YouTube. He's been in that arena for the last several years fighting the battle. And yes, what he does is he gets the used EVs, and sometimes he has a Frankenstein moment with these things, but you kind of live by trial by error because, yeah, it's not like we are, I mean, the technology and the training is getting there. But it is a challenge for us, and I think we'll overcome it. I am honored, Jens Martin Skibsted. I am so honored to have you on the show, and I want to thank you for the late hour in Denmark for joining us. And I remind folks to get on Amazon, check out the book, Expand, Stretching the Future by Design. We're going to get you back on, Jens, in the future to catch up with you. Be interesting to see where technology moves a year from now, and we'd love your take.
Thank you. It was my honor.
Excellent. Yes, Jens Martin Skibsted, Global Partner VP Foresight and Mobility. A ton of great information online for that. And so I will have all details in show notes. It's tough to cover everything in 1 hour. We will certainly have Jens back. If you're new to the show, we thank you for joining us. If you've been listening to our show for some time, please don't be bashful. Get on wrenchnation.tv. Give us your comments, thoughts, ideas, show topics. And if you know a great shop owner / technician, we always have an open mic to highlight their good works right here on Wrench Nation. Thank you so much. As I tell you every week, be safe, hug each other, and never forget to hug a mechanic.